Crystal and Guadalupe and Ruth for getting everything going here. We do have Dr. Ramona Wiss, who is the Director of Choral Activities at North Central College, which is in Illinois. And she is also the author of The Conductor as Leader, which is, for me, a transformational book. So thank you so much, Dr. Wiss, for writing it and
You're
for being here
welcome.
with us today.
Sure. Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure. I love talking to colleagues, and that's one of the things that we love about Zoom. Yes, roll your eyes here, right? Zoom, okay. But one of the things we do love about Zoom, right, has been that we can do this so easily. And last year for us at North Central, we were entirely virtual the entire year. And again, we could talk about that in a little bit, but we brought in so many composers that we would never have been able to bring in to talk about their music and just about life as a musician. And so, it's just it's fun, and I enjoy doing this. I'll just say this, and then Melanie and company, whoever wants to kind of steer it. I thought what I would do is kind of share some context for my work and the idea of sort of pursuing this idea of, what does it mean to be a leader as a conductor, and kind of give that context, whether you've read the book or not. And then talk a little bit, and I have some notes here so I can kind of stay on task, but talk about what's changed since I wrote the book, right? And then, kind of what I'm thinking about now. And then I know there were several questions that Melanie sent me that either you had submitted or from your conversation she sort of put together. So, but at any point, this is not a conference presentation and all of that. I would really just love to be a resource to talk, to answer questions, whatever. So you, at any point, anybody can just take me into a different direction. I'm good to go. So does that sound like a good way? Okay. All right. So, and this is not, damnation here. Has anybody read the book beside Melanie? Anybody read my book, or you just know about it? Okay. So Melanie has. Okay. Well, that's fine, because I don't. If you have, I don't want to repeat a bunch of things that I might have said in the preface. So I've been a conductor teacher for I think I've just finished 43 years. Okay. So kind of been around the block a bit, fairly early in my career. And I started as a high school teacher, by the way. I thought I'd be a high school teacher forever because, like most of us, our high school experiences were powerful. And so we tried to figure out how we could continue to stay in high school forever. So we just go to the other side of the podium, right? Um, so I was successful as a high school teacher, and did all the stuff, the tours and the contests and all of that kind of thing. Um, was at my second position. I was in one school for 4 years. I got tenured, built a lot of stuff. It was great. Took another position at a little more affluent school, a little better feeder system. But then after 2 years, I was the low person on the totem pole, and I got rift, which is a term we use around here, reduction in force. So I hadn't been tenured yet. Numbers had shrunk. I was without a job. So I got hired for what I thought was going to be a year at Northern Illinois University, a large regional university, to do student teaching supervision and just basically get that program up and running. And I stayed there for 10 years. And in that time, built a couple of ensembles, started teaching methods and doing some other kinds of things, and really found um, just a powerful connection to the college population, because in a lot of ways they're no different than high school or middle school. You're still doing the same stuff, and yet many of them are in professional programs, and it's just a really wonderful, and I would add, uniquely challenging age, right? So in this journey, even when I was first starting out, I started to pay attention to how excellence showed up. So, you'd see a program and you'd think, oh, it must be because they have a lot of money. and big booster groups with parents and all this kind of stuff. And then I would see programs that didn't do so well and think, oh, it must be a small school, and pretty quickly figured out that those correlations were really not uh, significant. In other words, sometimes those big schools with big budgets had pretty average programs that were not particularly um, large, and vice versa. So I spent a lot of time. I'd still love to when I can. I like bookstores, and I would go to the bookstore and I would find myself interested in books that were about essentially management at that time. I've never been a corporate America person. I've never worked retail. I mean, that's just not been my life. But somehow I kept going to these books and thinking, let me, what does this leadership book have to say? And I would read and think, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it's like to be the conductor of an ensemble instead of being the head of a company or something. So this really started my journey in reading and thinking about how do I take the principles that I was finding in other situations, other environments, and see if they had any worth for us as conductors. And of course, they all do. I think the fundamental principles of good leadership show up whether you're, a stay-at-home parent or a teacher or a conductor or the head of a Fortune 500 company. So over about 7 years, you know how it is when you're teaching, you don't have time for much else. And so summers and sabbaticals and whatever, I wrote The Conductor's Leader and framed it around really 5 pillars of vision, trust, teaching, which I think all conductors are teachers, whether you are at the most professional level or not, persuasion, and character. And so after a couple of introduction chapters and a closure, the heart of this book is about those 5 pillars. So everything I'm going to say tonight is going to be, in effect, some extension of one of those ideas or one of those areas. So the question always comes up when I talk to people is, well, what's changed? And I've been working on another book as well, and still trying to kind of see where that's going to lead. But they'll say, what's changed? And I say, well, nothing and everything, right? Nothing really has changed because leadership is about people. And in the book, I spent a good amount of time talking about the difference between leading and managing. That was a significant learning experience for me when I read a lot of really wonderful thinkers and really began to understand how we can be a conductor who leads, or we can be a conductor who manages. And of course, our job involves both, right? But the idea that as in our field, what has changed has not been impacted by COVID, has not been impacted in any unusual way by the world at large. When it comes to those 5 pillars, we still have to have vision and an action plan. You can't just lay on your couch and think about big things. You have to have an action plan. You still have to develop trust with the ensemble, and I would talk a lot about that because that's a big part. You still have to teach really, really, really well. And over the last couple of years, whenever I talk to my own students or I do Zooms or other presentations, I always say, okay, we're going to do it 3 times. You have to teach really, really, really well, because I think teaching is the core of everything we do in our relationships with people. My students know, I always tell them, teaching is just so much who I am, that if I'm at the grocery store and I'm standing in the condiments aisle and somebody just randomly says, have you ever tried this ketchup? I'll go into, sort of an oratory on ketchup. I'll be like, well, yes. Now this ketchup has this, but I have found that I just go because teaching is who I am, what I do, right? So teaching, I think, is really important. And then persuasion is this issue that nobody wants to talk about because it's really the opposite of what I would call coercion. And as conductors, we can get into coercive behaviors by shaming and blaming, and you didn't do your practice and you didn't come to rehearsal. And so it's kind of the dark side of leadership that we have to sort of face. And then ultimately character. So all of those things are still active in a COVID world, in a pandemic era. Now, what has changed, I think, and feels like changes every day, is the speed of life. Okay, I'm just going to throw that out there. The speed of life, the the judgment that comes with social media. That really wasn't on my radar when I was writing this book. It's not like social media didn't exist. I mean, the book was published the very end of 2007, effectively 2008. So it's not like that long ago. And yet, social media has been a significant influence, not always bad, but a significant influence in terms of the immediacy of information, but also the immediacy of judgment. I don't like this. He wasn't very good. She wasn't very good. They didn't do a good concert. They didn't place first. I mean, just every possible thing, right? And I think what's also changed or ramped up um, is I feel like the more I talk to colleagues all over at all different levels, there is a sense that everyone is doing more with less. Can you all resonate with that? You're doing much more, especially if you've been in the business for a while. You're doing a lot more than you used to, and with less staff support, maybe fewer students, maybe less money. I mean, it's just so that's a real compression feeling, right? And ultimately, what also I think has changed is that while mental wellness, mental health has always been a challenge, I mean, you go back thousands of years and it was a challenge, right? But somehow it seems to show up in our rehearsals and our teaching and our lives at a more dramatic level. And again, I don't know if you resonate with that. I certainly do. One of the other things that you may or may not know is I'm also a 500-hour certified yoga teacher. So I've been through, probably 6 or 7 years of training in everything from the sort of obvious physical stuff and alignment to meditation and mental wellness and all of those kinds of things. So I bring this now into my rehearsals and have been for probably 5 or 6 years. And I've written recently about this in Choral Journal. I am tomorrow finishing an 8-week course for an honors seminar. So it has some music students in it, but it's not a music class. That is a combination of yoga on and off the mat. So for part of the class, we do a mat-based practice, and then we read just different fundamental readings that are really just about ethical principles that are aimed to give students the tools to cope with life, not only now, but as you go forward, right? So those are the things that I think have changed or have just maybe been ramped up. Okay, the speed of life, the social judgment, certainly social issues, right? Doing more with less, and this focus on mental wellness. So having said that, and having had these 2 years, even though I've been teaching through them, and like you have pivoted lots of times and tried new methods and so forth. I feel like I have had an opportunity to really think again, anew, about this whole thing that we do, this music thing, this conductor thing, right? And and recently I was asked about being a woman conductor relative to a number of issues. And certainly I'm talking to this group of Women Band Directors International. So at any point in time, if you want to raise those aspects, you certainly can. But I think for me, I keep coming to this word I've been using, art making, because I think it's broad and it's real. We make art. Doesn't matter if you're teaching junior high and they can't read music or whatever. The thing that we do is make art. Art making is still really powerful. It looks different right now, and it may continue to look different. I think there's a sense that when we get done with COVID, everything will magically return to what it looked like in February of 2020. And that's not possible, right? And I don't mean that in a dark way. I just mean that life continues to evolve, COVID or not, right? Things are different, things evolve, things come into our radar that we didn't have before, right? So I think this should be an encouragement to us that the making of art, again, go really fundamental here. I'm not saying, oh, if you performed at Carnegie Hall, not just the doing of this thing that we do with other people is still really powerful. And we can talk about how, I'm a real practical person too, so I'm happy to talk about how do I, deal with people that don't seem to be on board, whatever. But at the end of the day, I keep thinking I have to trust that this thing we call music, that we say we love so much that we're going to do it for a career, that is going to speak louder, that is going to be more powerful than any threat to take away a scholarship or any grade issue, or you're going to lose your chair, or whatever. That the music and the desire, this is another thing that I really believe and I continue to think about. The desire to be excellent is a fundamental part of the human spirit. I'll jokingly say to my students, nobody gets out of bed in the morning and goes, today I think I'm going to shoot for mediocre, right? I mean, we want to be part of something excellent. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. That's got ensemble written all over it. That's got music written all over it, right? So, those things are powerful. And I think the idea of how music and art making can help our mental wellness, can help create stability, can help return hope back into the narrative. I think that's really powerful. And so those are the things I've really been thinking about. And when I think about them, then of course I think, well, what am I going to do about it? So then I think, okay, what does that look like in my rehearsal? So I'll just throw out some ideas there, and then we can field questions and so forth. But again, and this is because I am trained as a yoga teacher, but you don't have to be a trained yoga teacher to involve yoga, meditation, thinking, discussion, those kinds of things. So I always use breathing and body movement, and we do sun salutations and lots of different kinds of things to help people separate from the world that they just left. So, your singers, your instrumentalists, your students are coming in. What was that world that they were just in? And it was probably in some ways pretty tough, because they probably just scrolled through social media before they walked in, and they saw all the things that they think they're not, or they can't achieve, or they can't be, or can't do. So I want them to come into this space and have a separator. So standing, breathing, and as band directors, you can do this. I mean, when I taught at Northern in particular, I was head of music ed. I did all the supervision for everybody, choir, band, general music, orchestra. And you can do this in band as well. You can put your instrument in your lap. You can sit and breathe a little bit. And you don't have to use Sanskrit, and you don't have to, get kind of hippy dippy about all of this stuff. You just say, hey guys, it's good to see you. You know what? Let's take a second. Wow, it's busy, right? It's been really busy. Have you been busy? I've been going crazy. Oh my gosh, let's just hang on. Let's just do this. And then you just bring them to a good seat and you take a breath. You can ask them to close their eyes or lower their gaze a little bit. This doesn't have to be dramatic, right? It's just a way of honoring their need, just like your need, to sort of go, stop the world, I want to get off, right? Just like, okay. And you do that. And now, as you build that in, one of the things I have found has been really powerful. Does anybody do yoga? Does anybody do meditation on the call? Okay, not so much, a little bit. Okay. So one of the critical aspects of any of these kinds of modalities is the principle of non-judgment. Awareness, yes. Judgment, no. Now, this doesn't mean everything is good. People play out of tune and you're like, that's just lovely, kumbaya. No. I tell my students with a smile, you can't sing out of tune in my ensembles. Like, you just can't. And when they're new, they kind of go, good one. And then they look at me and they're like, oh dang, she's serious, isn't she? Right? So this isn't about that. This is about a really important skill that I think conductors need as well, which is to become aware of what's happening, how you feel, how your breath is going, what you're thinking about. Just be aware, and don't feel you got to change it or judge it, or we get into this task mode right away. Oh, this is something I'm aware of. I have to go do this. And so I've been able, little by little, to seep into the rehearsal. Just notice what your breath is doing today. You don't have to change it. Just kind of be aware. And I teach them to kind of understand that. And then I teach them to eventually move toward even breaths in and out, and then they change their nervous system. And I don't always tell them that, but that's what happens. And then they get balanced, and they get less freaked out. They get less emotional. They're able to focus more. And all of a sudden, now you have an ensemble that you can actually teach something to. So there's lots of ways I do this. I don't do it the same way every day. I don't spend 20 minutes on this, but I'm always trying to be aware that if I can think of the human in front of me, recognize that in some way that human is the same as I am, that we are experiencing the same kind of pressures of the world, then I think, well, what would I need? And if I would need to just remove myself from that for a minute, then let's help them remove themselves as well. Then you get into the work of your rehearsal, and it's always about the teaching and the challenge to, will you go with me on this journey? I talk to them a lot about, hey, we are building our narrative together. And I started to use that right when we shut down in 2020, because I said, hey, at some point, we're going to look back on this era. And I'm so glad that I'm sharing it with you. We are building our narrative together. And all of a sudden they're like, okay, this is kind of interesting. And they kind of pay more attention, and they feel validated, and like, she kind of appreciates me as a person. She's never said, we're building our narrative, first altos. It's like, hey, we're here, we're doing this music thing. And that is something bigger. Sometimes I think of the ensemble as the something bigger than ourselves. But isn't it really that music is that something bigger than ourselves, right? So this is the state I have to get myself into in order to come to a rehearsal, get the nuts and bolts work done, as in you got to get the notes learned. They got to start and stop and end at the right time, and we hope it's in tune, and right. But also to know that at the end of the day, I'm doing something much bigger. than the next concert or the next piece or even this whole year. I'm really grateful for the way last year and this year went, all things considered. But it hasn't been easy, and it's still not normal, whatever that means. So, there are still times I'm like, oh my God, okay, right? So I think that's the work of the conductor who wants to lead and not just manage, not just tick the boxes of I did these 5 pieces, I went to this contest, I did X concerts, and so forth. So I guess maybe I'll pause there. Yeah, I would just say I'm looking at my art making notes. I think for me, the making of art is about helping people become whole, right? So, based on everything I've already said, I think you can see how I'm leading there. It's not just about making good art, it's about making them understand themselves better, understand and respect the other people in the room more, which they don't always do, and by giving them tools to balance their breath and just kind of get right with themselves, get grounded. And that's a big part of it, by the way. When I teach yoga and even in my rehearsals, when I'm working on alignment, I always give them tools to ground themselves. And as band directors, of course, you could stand them up, right? But maybe you feel like that's weird and they would think it was weird because, like, we don't stand in band or something. Okay, fine. But then when they're sitting on their chairs, make sure that they're really sitting into their sit bones. Have them lift the bum flesh. They kind of get a chuckle out of that, right? And they have to find those bony protrusions that anchor them in, feet on the floor. And you build this not only as good alignment, because it is, right? It's great alignment for playing, but it's a sense of I'm secure. And how much of our life does not feel secure, right? So, okay, there's your security. Are you grounded? Okay, now let's balance the grounding with lifting. And then you work on all of however you want to work on the alignment. And so, that tree metaphor is so powerful. Roots into the earth, there's your grounding, right? My family life is crazy. I've got, a single family situation or single parent situation, whatever. That's what they're bringing in, right? But hey, here I feel really anchored. I feel secure. I feel grounded, right? And then with the lift, right, the trees, as the trees come to the sun, as they come to the sky, as they lift and that energy and that airflow happens, right? And I know for some of you this is pretty hippy dippy, but hang on. That's the hope part. That's the right? It's like that's the possibilities. We could really play a wonderful piece. We can do anything so I use those metaphors and those modalities as partly their coping strategy, but also partly to help them to know how to feel whole, how to feel balanced, rooted and lifted, root down to lift up, right? Teach that as an alignment principle, but it's a mental thing. If you can feel strong in your feet or in your sit bones and you can lift up from there, you're going to be a great ensemble. But you're also going to feel better in your body and in your spirit. Okay. I will take a sip of my tea in my magic cup that keeps it hot. So, over to you. You want to ask questions? Do you want to sign up for yoga with Mona? What do you want?
I love these analogies for posture because I can't tell you how many of my students like to sit like this when they play their instruments.
Well, and go ahead, yeah.
It reminds me very much of their personalities as well. When they're not feeling confident and when they aren't playing really well, they do tend to very much suck everything down and in. And if we can get them to open up a little posture wise, I think they'll sound better.
Well, and that's a natural segue in the rehearsal, like I'll do things even as I just stand them up, we stand, we do all of our alignment and everything like that. And I'll sometimes just have them put their hands out here. Or sometimes they'll say, oh, let's do like Superman arms or Superwoman arms. Well, once they do that, they're opening all of this part. And it doesn't take 3 PhDs to figure out that most of our life is here in this laptop or our devices, as well as, and you hit it, Melanie, right? I don't feel good about myself. I'm sad. So the body language, it's a cart horse kind of situation, right? If the body language is telling you, I don't want to get involved, and I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm heavy, that changes the state, right? Then I feel down and I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't want to engage. Well, if you change that body language, it's pretty impossible to not affect at least some of that change. So there's lots of ways. And again, you can be really creative. And frankly, there's some questions about burnout, and getting sort of reignited. Don't assume you've exhausted your creative ability in terms of teaching methodologies. Push the envelope a little bit. And it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be 20 minutes of something. It can be like, hey, let's take 3 minutes. I'm going to look at the clock. Okay, 3 minutes and counting. Everybody, let's do that. And you just decide to do stuff. And sometimes I remember one of my former students who's a really successful public school teacher. I remember seeing her with middle school kids in a rehearsal. And she used to do this thing where, okay, the rehearsal would start and she would go, and they would all do it. And then and this was all silent. She never said anything. And then she would be like, and they would all follow her, so this was this thing she developed. She figured out probably when she was teaching middle school, I cannot yell over 70 middle schoolers. So I'm going to do this all silently and we're going to kind of make it a game, right? So there's all kinds of ways to work with the body and the breath that affects the mind in the cleaning out of all the toxins. I mean, it really is. It's the toxicity of whatever their parent just told them this morning, whatever it is that the boyfriend or girlfriend just said, whatever social media judgment they're getting. It's just, there's so much of that. And at a practical level, you're not going to get a whole lot done in a rehearsal if you can't help them work through some of that. Now, I'm not talking about like being a therapist or doctor. We are not that. But to just say, say some good words, have a smile or an eye smile. If you're still wearing the mask, we're still wearing the mask, right? You have to acknowledge that you're dealing with people, and people are experiencing all that. So you have to somehow work through that in the rehearsal and then get them ready for the music to take over. Because now it's about the music. It's like, isn't it a cool phrase? What's happening here? One of my yoga teachers who was significant in my training, in her own funny way, when we would be working through something and like our bodies wouldn't kind of go where they needed to go, and she would just say, I see more in your future. And then we would all kind of chuckle. And I thought, what a great line. And so I would start to say to my ensemble, okay, yeah, I hear more in your future, but, blah, blah, blah. And they would kind of chuckle and, so knowing that we can always go to the music and like, what's there, right? What's in the music that could really bring us to something that we haven't experienced yet? But that's a way of presenting it. Then, all right, we got to go back to measure 84 and do it again. It's not right. Which version is going to be more compelling to your student, right? Let's do it again. Drill, drill, drill. Or, okay, we've moved forward, but there's more. There's more in this story, right? So this is the kind of stuff that will make it more interesting for us as teacher directors, but I think is going to make it much more interesting and put kind of new life into the arms of our performers. So Melanie, back to you. Do you want to ask any of these questions, or anybody want to ask questions?
I'll leave it open to the floor first. Go ahead, Ruth.
Hmm.
So I'll have to go back and figure out where I read this, but and I'm thinking of middle school boys right now,
Okay.
especially. But if you're standing up and I can see Superman and you do the
Hmm.
superhero pose
Right.
for 20 seconds,
Hmm.
there is actual research that shows how much more confident people feel.
I am not aware of that specific thing, but I'm absolutely not surprised by it. Absolutely not surprised by it. There's so much of that. I mean, some of it is the even by doing that, there's an opening that I keep going here. The heart center, this kind of chest and collarbones area,
Hmm.
is so compressed. And once you do that, what happens is once you open this, people start to take breaths they don't normally experience. I've also come across research, and I don't know, I'd have to go find it, but that all the time we spend on our devices, that a lot of that time we actually stop breathing, that we're holding our breath sometimes. So think about that. What does that feel like when there's no air going through your system, right? So this is why, again, it's just this idea of the alignment, and there's a million ways to do that in a rehearsal, a classroom setting, and it becomes. Here's the other thing: it becomes a kind of language of your relationship with your musicians. So I've been doing it so long now with my musicians that if I just say, okay, take a couple of minutes, sometimes I'll just say, take 2 minutes and do what feels good in your body today. Whatever you feel. And they'll do the typical like neck stretches and whatever, but they start doing their sun salutations, which they know because it's part of our thing. And I always I call it stepping out of their TV screen. I step over to the side so they don't have to feel like I'm in front of them watching them do this and then they're performing, right? And but I do watch them from the side, and I'm amazed at where they're going. I can tell that they're like going, okay, oh, give me, all right, I'm gonna get into this. I'm in music now. They're really, and then this becomes a tool, right? And sometimes it's very different than that. Sometimes I do like, let's shake this for 8 counts. Let's shake this for 8 counts. Let's do this. Let's do that. Now that, I just sort of change it up. And all of a sudden now it's a game. And they're kind of like, I don't really know what she's going to do, but this is interesting. And in the meantime, guess what? They're breathing. And we just kind of assume that. And we cannot assume that because breath, and this is why you can't go anywhere now without seeing meditation or, I mean, I've been reading in, like the Atlantic and the New Yorker and stuff, that companies now, like, big corporations are starting their CEO and company meetings with like, you know, 3 minutes of meditation or whatever. People are figuring out that they just can't live in this fast, busy, the voices, right? I call them the voices, right? Actual voices. You can't live in that world and never take a step back. So I blog for ChoralNet, which is the online resource for ACDA, for the Choral Directors Association, and under the Conductor as Yogi. And I write about various things. And I've often written about, I mean, at its heart, yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. It's not about your body positions. That's actually um, designed to help you come to a place to be able to sit for a long time and just kind of clear out the craziness. So I believe that. I believe that, Ruth, and I think there's a lot that we can do. And it's a really good starting place because you could just be creative and your students better than anybody. So good.
Other questions? I have one for you.
Okay.
And this was one that I had emailed you.
Okay. And I've got those here.
It's the second one. How would you encourage a leader that's struggling to find a vision? either for themselves or their ensemble. Often in my career, I've hit junctures where I just feel like totally lost or
Yeah.
feel personal dissonance against some facet of my life. And it has
Mm-hmm.
always been a big struggle and a long 6 months, 9 month process to kind of
Mm.
figure out the direction. Do you have any advice for steering the ship in
Yeah.
moments like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of things come to mind. One is that it's absolutely a normal function of being a human, right? Um, one of the books that I read, I literally read every summer, um, and I think I talk about it at the end of my book because it influenced me a lot, is Anne Morrow Lindbergh's book called A Gift from the Sea. And it's an interesting book because it's a very reflective book that she wrote, I think, in 1955. And in some ways, it reads 1955, and in many more ways, it reads like today, right? And one of the things that and this has a little bit more to do with relationships, like a relationship with your partner or significant other. But she really talks about how, you know, in the later points of your life, that you really go through like a second adolescence. And that, what I don't know how many of you teach junior high, middle school, whatever, or have, but we sort of, if somebody says middle school, you kind of go, okay, I get that that's going to be nuts because they're going through this adolescent period, right? And we can joke about it and say, well, it's hormones or whatever. But moreover, we think about all of the questioning, and I want to be separate from, in this case, when you're a middle schooler, I want to be separate from my parents, but I still need them. And so this angsty stuff of middle school, in Gift from the Sea, she makes a really good case for that being something that happens more than once. And it doesn't look like it. Maybe you don't break out with acne, or whatever, but that this idea of searching, not knowing, trying to find yourself, wanting to separate, but still wanting the security, all that stuff happens. So, that's important to know, number one. I think too, having things that ground you, whether it's a faith base, whether it's, I run every day, whether it's, people in your life, or some combination of all those things, is really necessary because um, you need to know what is terra firma, right? In order to then know what can or should change. And I guess what I mean by that on a practical level is this place where I'm feeling this now in my life, is that just part of the evolution of being a human and going through different things, or is it that kind of still small voice that says, you know what, good work, but now you need to do something somewhat differently. You need a restructuring of your job. Maybe you stay where you're at, but you're going to do something slightly different. Or maybe you should be thinking about, maybe this is time to make a move. Maybe I just want to shift my attention from this and more over here. So I think it's like understanding it's a work in progress and not being afraid of it. But the reason I make a point about feeling grounded is that it's easy to have a bad day and then go, that's it, I should leave my job, right? So you need to have some grounding. You need to be able to go, okay, let's take a step, let's take a breath, let me go out for a walk. I walk probably every day. I just I have to get fresh air. I have to just get out, right? um, and then you're like, okay, all right, now I'm good. And then if you come back and you feel grounded and you're really still hearing that same thing about maybe you need a change or you need to try, then that's good leading. That's what people would call the spirit or prana in yoga, or intuition, or the universe speaking to you. I mean, there's lots of ways to phrase it. Um, so yeah, Ruth.
I think one of the things that has come out of COVID, and it may be a curse, it may be a silver lining to some, but we're having all these shortages of staff in different careers and
Mm,
jobs, and I almost think COVID's been a catalyst for a lot of people having their second adolescence, maybe.
but go further with that.
um, There are so many people who've decided, I don't want to kill myself working 60 to 80 hours a week. They might have discovered, I want to be with my family in this time, or
Mm-hmm.
I want to have a different focus so that, yeah, I am taking care of myself and my mental
Mm-hmm.
health needs. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, there's even an ad on TV right now about mental health is health. And hopefully we're getting to a point that there's not such a stigma about, if we can see that somebody has a broken leg, we have compassion. But if we can't see what's going on with somebody mentally, and
Mm-hmm.
we're just really hard on people that
Mm-hmm.
we can't see that. And I think people want something different.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think they're trying to ground themselves and figure out
Mm-hmm.
what's next.
Well, I agree, and we've seen that a lot, right? We've seen a lot of people, you go through your news feed and you see that how many people have quit their jobs, or they've decided they're going to work only half the time and work at home. They want to be with their family, whatever. And I don't think any of that's bad. I do think it's it's some of the awareness that will become more embedded into our everyday life. That people have decided, you know what, COVID was, a tough thing, but it really made me see that I was not living, you know, a full life and so forth. And I think that's important because then it helps us as educators, as conductors to think about, so what does that mean? Do I do the same number of concerts? Do I do the same number of pieces? Do I do the same schedule of, whatever has been the norm? Do we do that? And I always have to be careful about how I phrase it, because I'm very passionate about what I do. I have a high bar, um, you know, recovering perfectionist, all of that stuff, right? I think most of us who do this have at least, a good percentage of that, right? So I'm not saying like it doesn't matter because, students are having a tough day, then you shouldn't care that they don't play or sing well. I don't believe that. And I think earlier in my discussion, maybe you recall that I'm trying to do a both and. I'm trying to respect the mental wellness. I'm trying to help them build that. But then I'm also saying, I see more in your future. I hear more in your future, right? And let's do this, right? Let's do this. And I think I have found ways to build a relationship with the singers, most of them anyway, right? Where they know I'm in it for them. I'm not in it because I want to look good on stage and, get a different job, with, maestras. They know that I'm not doing that, right? Um, but I do think this era is an opportunity for us to say, okay, you know what? Let's still do this for all the right reasons. Let's still honor the art form. Let's maybe even get better at what we've been doing. I think a lot of our dialogue in the profession has been, oh, it's not as good as it was 2 years ago. Well, I'm wondering at what point we're going to realize that 2 years ago, maybe it wasn't that great either. And because everything in life has changed, we're sort of elevating 2 years ago to be like the best ever. Everything was awesome. Well, it probably wasn't, right? So now we can say, okay, let's recalibrate all of this. So knowing what I know now and knowing what I know about my own life, do I really want to work 60 or 80 hours? Couldn't I work 40, right? And have a really good teaching experience, impact the students in powerful ways, have powerful performances, but change some things and stop drinking the Kool-Aid of the busier you are and the more hardware you get and the more titles you have, somehow this equals better. There's a really great article. It came across my news feed on Sunday. It was in, I think, the Atlantic. I think it was written by, you probably know, I forget his name. He's a professor at Harvard who teaches apparently the most popular class Harvard's ever had on happiness. Probably heard about him before, so you could probably find it. But he was talking about, you know, what happiness was and what people figured out after they lived for a long time. And they pretty much figured out that all that other stuff, the hardware and the, all of that really doesn't make you happy. So what makes you happy? And I know for me, yeah, do I want a great concert? Absolutely. Do I cringe if a note is a little out of tune? Yes. And why did they do that? And, whatever. But I feel better and happier and more fulfilled and more right if I feel like I'm doing good work for the right reason. I think that at the end of the day, that's it. I'm doing good work, good art for the right reason. Not for me to look good, not for people to applaud me, but to create something that we can only create with a whole bunch of people in the room, and that they can take away with them. I mean, it's a pretty sweet deal. It's just that it can be exhausting, and that's what we have to recalibrate. Right?
Would you mind to speak a little bit more about how you crafted your own personal mission statement? Because I do feel like, for me personally, that section of the book was the most pivotal for me. Being able to, as you said, ground yourself in knowing exactly what is important for me has helped me so much in silencing some of the other less important ideas and finding what's truly for me and for my students. Would you mind to speak on how you got started with that, or what process you used? Because I know for me, it was very challenging to sit down and try and put those ideas on paper.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and what I didn't specifically say at the beginning for those who haven't read the book is that one of the big things that influenced me when I was starting to read about leadership and whatever is somebody put on my radar the name Robert Greenleaf. You may or may not know that name, but I talk a lot about him in the book. He was I think AT&T exec for many years who was very, very successful. And then when he retired, he really started on sort of a mission to help other people to understand leadership and whatever. But at the core of his work is this concept of servant leadership, right? And that's a word that in certain ways we understand. It's certainly not a new phrase, but Greenleaf had a way of taking the religiosity necessarily out of it, and just basically trying to explain what servant leadership was, which is really to and I think this is really where the mission statement comes in. It's like, how can I help other people move forward? I think that at the core of what we do as teachers is to want to help other people move forward. Okay. Now we can do that by dictating and telling them to do everything exactly in one way, the way you want it to be done, and et cetera, et cetera. This is very top down, right? And we're very familiar with that, especially as women. I think we probably still understand that, it's still a very male dominated world. And we've made lots of inroads. And, I was not burning my bra in the 70s or whatever, but, we have to understand that it's still not, it's still not equitable in terms of power and understanding and what we bring to the table. So I'm not a man basher. I'm married to a man, whatever. It's just that we have different ways of looking at things. So the idea of servant leadership is for me was powerful, because once I got a better understanding of it, I thought, okay, well, how do I serve the people I lead? It means people I lead are my singers. How do I serve them? And by answering that question, it really led me to a mission statement. Well, it's like, I guess, using everything that I have, talent, skills, opportunity, training, vision, whatever, using who I am to help move them forward. I mean, essentially that's the core of my mission statement. So I think I would really suggest, you don't have to read my book, but I think you could read some core things by Greenleaf, or people who and by the way, this is a huge, there's a Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. There are centers around the world. Schools like Gonzaga University have, I think, master's degree in servant leadership. So it's really, evolved to be a way of thinking about how we see our role as leaders as being something that helps other people, rather than I'm in power and I get to do. It's like it's a reverse pyramid, right? The traditional pyramid is me at the top of the pyramid looking down on everybody, telling them what to do. Where really, when you reverse that, you're sort of at the bottom supporting the rest of the triangle, who are the singers or the players or the people you're given to lead. So I think, Melanie, really, for me, the first thing to do is to come to an understanding of the kind of leadership you want to have. And I think if you spend some time reading about servant leadership and how it works in action, whenever I speak or write about servant leadership, I have to immediately stop the myth, because people think, oh, serve, that means you're subservient. And, there's a lot of baggage around the word serve or servant or whatever that you have to kind of unpack, right? But when you really understand it, and understand, by the way, that it's harder than traditional leadership. It's harder than traditional leadership because traditional leadership is much more management, right? So let me give you an example. Here's a conductor who is a manager going into a rehearsal, okay? So if I'm in manager mode, I come in with my list of all the things I have to fix. I get right into the rehearsal. I might not even greet people so much, right? I'm just kind of like, okay, get that song out, go to page 84, let's get it done. And then it's done and I feel okay. Me. And I check off the list. I do that with 6 other pieces, and then I call it a day. Well, we do that in all of our rehearsals to some degree. But the context for what we do in a rehearsal must be much more about leading. So people oriented. Managing is not bad. We have to be able to manage. But managing is really about things and tasks and about keeping things running, right? But leadership is really about people, which makes it harder. I remember when my daughter was in high school and we'd be angsting over whatever thing she was going through, whatever. And I'd say, life would be so easy if it weren't for all the people, and then we'd have a good chuckle, right? But that's true, right? But it's also would be very boring without all the people, because all of your most powerful experiences have been with other people, maybe making music or, whatever. So, but I think understanding servant leadership and understanding the difference between leading and managing starts to get you thinking and get you more aware about, how do I present as a leader? Am I just managing all the time? Or am I expanding outward to think about the experience of the person? Are they growing beyond this concert? Am I able to build beyond musical technique? These are the kinds of things that I think at some point you start to ask yourself. And if you really want to be in this business for the long haul and you want to feel good about your impact, um, in the larger world. I mean, again, I keep coming back to this phrase. I'm very practical. I want my choirs to sound great. I want them to knock it out of the park. I want people to go, oh my God, I've never heard about. I mean, I want that. I'll be really honest about it. But I've been able to figure out how to get there differently. And that for me then netted a mission statement where I just kind of said, yeah, I'm going to use whatever I have. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that I am going to drain every bit of who I am and be left with a puddle on the floor, right? It just means I'm going to understand the things that I bring to the table that are unique. And I'm going to use those because they are authentically me. I'm going to use those to help other people. And by the way, I happen to do it in music. So the mission statement starts, I think, to help us understand that it has to come from your unique skill set, who you are as a person, how you just are in this world. That's going to be most powerful because it's the most real. You're not trying to be somebody else. You're not trying to be your advisor from your master's degree. You're trying to fit some other mold. You're trying to be who you are, which means it'll be the most effective. Um, and then realize that that's probably going to be how you show up in other places, in your family life, in your relationships, in your neighborhood, whatever your various communities are. If you bring that same self, then I think we find there's more integrity in the sense that we are integrated. I'm not this person over here and I'm that person over there and I'm, whatever. I'm just me. And this is both my yoga training, but also this article that I just referenced about happiness and whatever, is that one of the things that were powerful for me that I try to teach my own students is that it's not about putting stuff on, it's about stripping stuff away. Because we learn in the yoga practice that you want to peel off the stuff that the world has put on you, expectations and trauma, and just that's the goal. And then you find you, and you're like, hey, I'm pretty cool, so I'm going to go be me in all of my situations, rather than all the stuff that's been put on me, the expectations about what I should look like, or what I should be doing now at 29, or all this stuff. It's just a heavy burden. It gets heavier and heavier and heavier. So the point is to just peel that stuff away. And you do that over time. You do that with awareness. And then I think the mission statement will kind of become evident. I don't know if that helped, Melanie. Probably still
Oh, it
hard.
does. No, for me, like that was the point of the book that I walked away with that has
Well,
been
that's good to
so
know.
helpful, and it has stayed with me for a very long time. Because I feel like I have lived, especially in the early part of my career, a life where I was having to put a lot of different coats and
Mm-hmm.
uniforms and costumes on to try and be something I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And having the chance to release all that and just know exactly who I am and what I want to be and where I want to go. It's a nice place to be.
It's a
And I
great
don't
place to
always
be.
stay there, it's a curvy road. So,
It's hard, and everybody will deal with it differently. There are people that I know who are like 20 and they're so they know themselves. I just admire them. I'm like, how did you get there so fast? How is it that at 20 you just know who you are and it just doesn't, And one of my sisters-in-law, um, she's so cool on a lot of levels, and she's funny, and sometimes she just says stuff that everyone goes, oh my God, did she actually say that? But what I always say about her is that she is so authentic. There is nothing I've never seen her not be her. And I'm kind of like, that's kind of refreshing, and so I think that's part of it too, is just to be like, at some point, if I'm going to have to go into a dialogue in the grocery store about the various ketchups, that must be me. So I can chuckle about that, but that's who I am. And when I reside there, I feel so right. There's a sort of felt rightness about, like, you'll have these moments where you're just like, this is so right. Doesn't mean easy it's just like, this is because in those moments you are who you are. You're being yourself. You're not trying to meet some expectation of a parent from 20 years ago that said something once, or these kinds of weird things. We don't even realize we're carrying this stuff around until we get quiet, which, again, is my yoga shout out, is like, or whatever, go for a walk. You don't have to sit on a mat and and chant and burn incense. Go for a freaking walk and look at a tree, right? Um, get some fresh air. I mean, it's amazing what just getting away from the students and the music and the scores and the buses and whatever else your brain is just fried with, to just sort of think a thought all the way through, and you will get inspiration, and you'll get back to who you are. I think that's the challenge.
Absolutely. I do want to be very cognizant of your time. So we have reached our typical hour, and I wanted to
Sure.
thank you so much for
Oh my
joining us
gosh.
this evening. It has been fantastic. If you're
You're
ever in North
welcome.
Carolina, you send me an email and I'll be happy to buy you a cup of coffee.
Oh, coffee. You spoke my name. Yeah. You know what? It's a pleasure. I mean, it's really a pleasure. And I sort of joke about, you can just wind me up and I'll keep going about leadership, because I just think about it all the time. And that's not an exaggeration. I really, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about it in some way. And that doesn't mean deep thoughts, writing essays. It just means, like, oh, what do they need? What do they need? That's the question I guess I ask a lot. So maybe if you have a takeaway, a practical takeaway, then maybe that's it. Just ask yourself that question. As you go into your rehearsal, or you're doing your prep, or Guadalupe's having her concert in a couple of days, right? On Thursday, okay, what do they need today? What do they need from me right now? And sometimes it's really basic, like, they just need me to stop talking and just let them make music. And other days it's they need me to talk more. You know what I mean? So it's not like there's one magic method that everybody, it's really, it's that what is needed now, right? So I think that's maybe a practical takeaway. If you're like, tomorrow you're like, yeah, that was a pretty good Zoom, yeah, so now what? I mean, right? It's like you go to a conference or something and you're all like inspired by people, and then you go back and you're like, yeah, I don't know what to do about any of that. I know it was really lovely, but I don't know what to do about any of that. So if there's one little practical takeaway, then just ask yourself that question. Okay, so what does my ensemble need today? What do they need right now in this moment? And I think that can be really cool. So anyway, you can find me. I'm not on Facebook. I'm the only one. But my email and so forth you can get, and then shoot me an email. Let me know if you had any success by asking yourself that question. Maybe even take a week, and just say, every day this week I'm going to consciously, and I'm a big believer in the post-it note. Do a post-it note and stick it on your stand, on your music stand or in that score. Maybe stick them in every piece. You're going to do 2 pieces tomorrow, 3 pieces, whatever. At the beginning of every piece, put what do they need now? And you'll be like, oh yeah, what do they need now? Right? And all of a sudden it'll change your approach a little bit. And I would be really curious if you did that as a little experiment, if that changed anything for you or for them. And maybe not. So anyway, great pleasure. My best wishes to all of you for being healthy and safe, and your students too. And just thank you for your work. They need you.
Thank you so
Good.
much.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Yes, thank
Be
you.
well.
Appreciate
Bye
it.
bye. Bye, Jennifer. Bye, Guadalupe. Everybody. Crystal.
Bye.
Ruth.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.